Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our new weekly Soul of the Parsha class. We are now entering the week of Parashat Va'era, the second Parsha of the book of Exodus, and we're going deeper into the whole story of the Jewish people, the Israelites in Egypt, and really the beginning of their redemption. The whole topic of the book of Exodus is all about exile and redemption. This is the first major, most archetypal exile of the Jewish people, and also it tells the story of the most archetypal redemption from exile. And this pattern, this basic image, maybe the most fundamental story in the entire 5 books of the Torah, maybe the most fundamental story in Judaism and Jewish history in general, where we mention the exile into Egypt and the redemption, the salvation from Egypt, every day in our morning prayers, every holiday, not just Passover, which commemorates the coming out of Egypt, every holiday, every day, even when we bless the food. It's something that's very fundamental. And the reason it's so fundamental is because this notion of us going into exile and coming out of exile is really in many ways the basic, most deep pattern of existence, of what life is all about. Exile doesn't just mean the Jewish people being out of their homeland. And redemption doesn't just mean coming back from other lands back to the Holy Land. This is the simplest, most basic, most superficial level of understanding these two concepts. On a wider, deeper level, exile suggests any kind of being out of place, disconnected from our root, from the source of our being, from where we belong, from where we know who we are, from where we're doing what we're supposed to do. If we're not connected truly to who we are, to what we're supposed to do, if we're outside, orbiting around somewhere around where we should be, this is exile. If we forget our calling, if we don't know what our purpose is, if we're lost, if we're suffering, that's exile. And redemption means going back into our true orbit, going back to our center, the center of gravity, to who we are, to revealing, rediscovering again and again and again who we truly are, and assuming our true position in the world. And this is a constant journey. We can say even that when psychologists talk about individuation, when they talk about every human being discovering gradually over their lives what their true nature is, what their true identity is, what their true purpose is, they're coming out of exile. It's their own personal redemption. Every voyage, every journey, every discovery, and we often have many cycles of such journeys of discovery and rediscovery in our lives. All of this is variations on a theme. It's going back to this basic motif of coming out of Egypt. The Hebrew word for Egypt, Mitzrayim, suggests constraints, limitations, things that limit who we can be, our true potential. And the redemption, the coming out of Egypt, means opening up, coming out to a broader, wider space, expanse, in which we can grow and blossom. In Hebrew, the two words for exile and redemption are very, very similar, very close. The word for exile is two variations. One is galut, that's the more commonly used. The other one, very similar, comes from the same consonants, is gola. The word for redemption is geula. Only one letter apart. Gola is a 4-letter Hebrew word. Geula is made up of the exact same letters with just the letter Aleph inserted. between the first and the second letters. Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, connotes unity, divinity, or godliness, also light. And the idea is that redemption is the taking of the stuff of the galut, of exile, the stuff of our lives as it was when we weren't connected to our root, and not throwing it away, but just interjecting, inserting light, lighting it from within, and it changes. If you take the major letters of these two words, then you have just two letters. It's the letters gal, gimel and lamed, right? Two consonants. The others are vowels. So in both gola and geula have two major letters, gal. Gal is a wave. And when you put the two words together, gal and gal, it's like two waves, but it creates a new word, which is galgal. What is galgal? Galgal is a wheel that turns. That's why it's an actual sort of round word, because it's one syllable repeated. Gal gal, and you can repeat it endlessly. Gal 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 gal, just like a wheel that turns endlessly. So you can say that the first, and even pictorially, you can draw a wave, and then you can draw another wave. But another way to do it is you draw one wave, and the other wave, you put them together, you get a circle. So gal is a wave. There's the wave of the exile, and then there's another wave. There's the wave, the gal of geula. And if you put these two waves together, one semicircle and another semicircle, you get a whole circle. And this is a wheel, the wheel of life, the wheel of fortune, the wheel of motion. Everything that's in motion goes through these two waves. And we need to recognize if this is a good wave or a bad wave. We all need to surf on the waves of our lives, which are really the waves of exile and the waves of redemption, gal hagola and gal hageula. Now we can take this word galgal. Galgal is totally circular. If it's totally circular, we get a feeling that we're not going anywhere. That could be very disheartening. If it's just a constant circle, then we feel that it's, one day we're up, one day we're down. The Arabs have a saying, Yom Asal, Yom Basal. One day is like honey, the other day is like onion. It's one day is sweet, one day is sour. And that's the Arabic version of the wheel of exile and redemption. But if we add just one letter to the word galgal, we add the letter vav inside the second wave. The second wave, well, if you're an optimist, the second wave, of course, is redemption. If you're a pessimist, the first wave is redemption and the second wave is exile. But since we're optimists, the first wave is exile and the second wave is redemption. So if you put vav in the middle of the second wave, the word galgal, wheel, becomes the word gilgul, which is reincarnation. Reincarnation comes from the same root as wheel. It's like the wheel of fortune, the wheel of life and death. But it changes because it becomes from just a noun, it becomes an action, gilgul, to reincarnate, to be reincarnated, leitgalgel. So gilgul is reincarnation. And now it's asymmetrical. And though the circle is broken, it becomes a kind of spiral. Why does it become a kind of spiral? Because the second wave has an added value that the first wave didn't have. The Vav suggests the light of God coming down. The Vav is just one line, and you draw it, you illustrate it you start with the top, you go down. So Vav in Kabbalah, in Chassidut, always suggests a sort of ray of light that goes up from heaven downwards. So if you add that into the second wave, you get, similar to the idea that Geula is just Gola with the letter Aleph, with light within it. So the first Gal is just a Gal, it's an empty Gal, it's just a wave. You're just carried off by waves. But the second gal, you have a vav in the center, it's filled with divine light, and then you feel that it's not just a circle, an endless circle goes nowhere. You feel it's progressing. The second half of the word is different, it's richer. And it has a linear element, not just a circular element, because vav is a line, a straight line. So you're moving from this endless circle to something that you feel that there is a circular element, because you're going to be, you have to go through several rounds of changes in your life. But you feel that whenever you reach the second wave, there's an added value. Something has been gained, something has been learned. You've connected to a certain ray of light, and that helps you elevate yourself and advance. So if you add to a circle, you add a line, it becomes a spiral. And the word itself, galgal, is circular, but gilgul suggests a spiral. Also, gilgul, now this new word with the vav, has the gematria, the numerical value of chesed. Chesed is love or loving kindness. You don't get that with galgal. Gilgul is 72, that's the numerical value. 72 is the same numerical value as chesed. So now it becomes an act of sort of grace or love of God. God is loving us by turning the wheels of our life into an upward, progressing, advancing spiral. That was just an introduction to get us into the topic. The topic we want to talk about today is we want to talk about the title of the class is the spiral of suffering. We spoke about a spiral, and the spiral is constantly reaching, advancing towards redemption, towards solutions to our problems, towards more and more light and fulfillment. But there's also an element that whenever you're in a spiral, before you go up to a new level, you have to go down again. And which means that there's always a point in time in which you feel like things are becoming darker and less understood. And you feel that suffering is an inevitable element of the spiral of being. And this is what we want to talk about today. Why does suffering seem to be endless? And how do we mitigate or make suffering bearable? In Hebrew, the word to bear, actually in Old English as well, is to suffer. To suffer something is to bear something. You bear the suffering, same word. Lisbol, that means to bear, to endure. We need to endure sufferings, and we need to find a way of making it bearable. And it goes along with thinking about this notion of a spiral and constant growth. And we're going to see it very, very beautifully played out in some verses in the beginning of this Parsha, Parshat Va'era. Because this year, as any of you who follow the classes know, we're just focusing on the first segment of each Parsha. And we want to take something particularly from the first segment. So we're going to start by putting the opening of the Parsha in context. It really has to do with the end of the previous Parsha, the Parshat Shmot. So the previous Parsha spoke about the beginning of the hardships in Egypt, Pharaoh enslaving the Hebrews, and then Moses being born, and Moses discovering his calling before the burning bush. And then he is very hesitant about becoming a leader, and God convinces him to become a leader. And once he's convinced, he goes to Egypt and he unites with his brother Aaron, and then together they confront Pharaoh. All this happened in the previous parsha, right? They confront Pharaoh, and very straightforwardly, they come to Pharaoh and they tell him, we want you to release the Hebrews, the sons of Israel. So has God decreed. Pharaoh mocks God. He says, who is God? I haven't heard about him. I don't know him. And of course, the most expected thing the thing you would expect most happens. He refuses. But not only does he refuse, but he interprets the very fact that the Hebrews even dare to suggest that he would let them go as a kind of laxity on their part, which comes from him being too lenient on them. So he decides to be a tougher king, and he makes things worse. And he says, now, not only do you have to do the same amount of work as before, I see that you're becoming too lax, because I must have been too kind, so it's time for me to be tougher. So now you have to collect your own straw, and which adds a lot of work to the whole thing. And it's not like you have to collect the straw, but you need to do less. You need to do the same amount of work, but now you also have to do to collect, to find the straw yourself. Before I provided it for you, now you have to provide it yourself. And then things go haywire, and the officers in charge of the Jewish people, they get beaten up by the more superior officers, and they go to Pharaoh, and again he mocks them. And what it ends up being is that everyone is angry at Moses. And Moshe finally agreed to become the savior, to become the God's messenger. And he was so hesitant, but he agreed. And the previous Parsha ended with him only making things worse. So we see here something very, very important, very, very fundamental to what happens when you start serving God, is that when you start serving God, things become worse. They don't become better. This we learned from Moshe. Moshe he didn't really want to. He needed a lot of convincing. He ended up being convinced. And what did he get for it? Everyone's complaining. Everyone hates him. They say, we wish you didn't come. Now you made it worse for us. Just go to where you came from and don't bother us anymore because you just made things worse. And he is so confused. He turns to God. And this is how the previous Parsha ended. He turns to God and he says, "Oh Lord, why did you bring harm upon these people?" Lama hare'ota la'am hazeh. Very, very powerful words. Why did you make it worse? You could have done nothing. Why did you make it worse? And then he adds another question. Why did you send me? Very, very deep existential questions. Why did you cause this suffering? Why did you make things bad and worse? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, this people's situation has only worsened, and you did not save them. Resounding words, and these questions echo. We're left hanging at the end of the previous parasha with these words, with this question. The final verse is a kind of answer, a very weak answer. God is telling him, no, you shall see that now I'm going to save you. But according to many interpretations, this isn't really the answer. The answer is really coming in the beginning of our parsha, which means that we're left hanging. It's a kind of cliffhanger. It's not the kind of cliffhanger that leaves you in suspense, but it leaves you with a resounding question. And this is something actually experienced by many people who are on the path of tshuva. They do great changes in their lives. They change sometimes everything about their lives. They change their appearance, they change their habits, they start observing Sabbath, they start changing what they eat and don't eat, and who they touch, and so many things. And they're really hopeful that now everything is going to be much, much better because I'm doing God's will. And sometimes there is a short euphoria, but often what happens is similar to what happened to Moshe. Is you do this amazing change, and you tie yourself to this duty, and things become worse. And you say, why am I doing this? And also the people around you aren't very, they're not always very encouraging. Many Baalei Tshuva, they get this reaction. You were nicer before. This. You were a nicer guy before. When you were still secular, it was nicer to hang around with you. You didn't deal with all these little details, and you weren't as judgmental. And I preferred it when it was before you made this change. And you're just making things more complicated. and just let us be. And now we all have to do things in your favor. We have to change things in order to accommodate you, and so on. And of course, it's not the same situation, but it's a similar situation. Things become worse. So before we experience a spiral, we experience a descent. We experience a hiding of the face. We experience questions, unanswered questions. Why? Why does it need to become worse before it becomes better? Why did you send me? And just that the idea that the Parsha ends this way is extremely powerful, the previous Parsha. It ends with, this whole Parsha was about this character Moshe discovering, running away, and then meeting God and fighting and connecting to his, mission, and going on his mission, and not just failing, making it worse. And that's how the Parsha ends. That's a strong message that's being, relayed here. What is the answer? The answer in this Parsha is the opening of the Parsha. And the opening of the Parsha is God tells him, here it is. God tells him, God spoke to Moshe and told him, I am God. And the words for I am God is now he's using the central, what is called God's essential name, the tetragrammaton, the four-letter, unpronounced name of God, which we call the name Havaya, right? The four-letter tetragrammaton, unpronounced name. Of course, this name has appeared many, many, many times before. But now it appears in a different context. He tells him, now you have to learn my true essence. Because in the previous Parsha, Moshe wanted a name, and he was given a different name. He was given the name Eheye, I shall be. Or as the famous translation to English is, I am that I am. But now he tells him his essential name. And then he tells him, and this is where the name of the Parsha comes in, he tells him, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I revealed myself, and this is the name of the Parsha, Va'era, I revealed myself, I showed myself, only with a more particular limited name. It's also a name we're careful not to pronounce, so I'll say it once, but then I'll pronounce it differently. It's called El Shaddai, but we pronounce it Kel Shakai. And it's a name that means limitation, which really means to the first generations of Judaism. Of course, the name Havaya appeared many, many, many times. God spoke to them using that name, and he said, this is my name. But what he's saying now is, they knew the name, but they didn't really know what the name meant. And I didn't acquaint myself to them with this name fully. I used it. They knew the name. But really, when you're talking about levels of godliness, they knew only a limited level of myself. The limited level is embodied in the name Kel Shakai, which actually means a force of limitation. And which means really that up until now, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all I revealed was my power to make limited changes in the world. Limited changes means you take the world and you modify it, and you do small changes. Of course, they had miracles, they were saved, a lot of things happened. And it means actually two things. It means I made them promises, but I never really kept them. I promised they would have the promised land, but it was never fulfilled. So it's something limited, that's one. And the other is, like I said, is that I showed them only a limited amount of my power, how I can change things gradually, a little bit, details. However, now to you and to the Jewish people, I'm about to reveal my essential name, Havaya. Havaya is the name that fulfills the promises of the more limited name. And also, it's the power to completely recreate reality anew. The whole idea coming out of Egypt, right? The word Passover in Hebrew, Pesach, means to jump, not just to walk. Walking is making gradual changes. That the patriarchs knew. But to make jumps in reality, to completely turn things upside down and create an upheaval and totally destroy Egypt and take the Jewish people out of it, that is a totally different level of miracle. And that's what I'm about to reveal. So this becomes the answer to why did you make things worse. This is where the Alter Rebbe, whose Yortzeit we celebrated last week, that's what he explains. He explains, how is this the answer? How is, now I'm about to reveal my essential name, my greater power, the power that fulfills the promises to the patriarchs, and the power that is able to not just make a gradual change in reality, but a complete upheaval of things, to completely disrupt the order of things. How can this be an answer to the question, how have you made things worse? He says, because it goes together. In order for a new level of godliness to be revealed, it needs to be preceded by a darkness. You can't go directly from the previous name, Kel Shakai, or the limited revelation of God's power, to the fuller revelation of God's power, straightforwardly. First, you need a break, a space, a gap, a darkness, a worsening of things. That's how it works. It can't work any other way. That's how the spiral works. There needs to be descent for the sake of ascent. There needs to be a worsening for the sake of a better good to emerge. This is really what he's telling him. So we're going to see this now in a beautiful, beautiful way in the next verses that appear. So the Parsha opens, again, with God telling Moses, I am Havaya. Up until now, I have shown myself to the first generations of Judaism. And we have to stress the word shown. This is also important. Right? The name of the Parsha is I have shown. I have shown myself, or I have revealed myself to the patriarchs in a limited fashion. Now I'm going to be known, not just shown. I'm going to be known to you with my essential name Havaya, with a higher, fuller revelation of my essence. So the first level to the patriarchs, it was something you could see. Seeing means something more figurative, relatively speaking, something you can see or sense. But now we're going to reach a higher level of connection, which isn't seeing, it's knowing. The name of the Parsha is named after the lower level revelation. I have shown myself to the previous generations in a limited capacity. But now I'm going to make it known to you. Right? Let's read the verse to be more precise. It says, I haven't made myself known to the previous generation with my name Havaya, but now I am going to make myself known to you. So all this suggests, again, that there's a kind of spiral with the name of the Parsha stressing, really connecting to the end of the previous Parsha, the worsening, the why have you made things worse. Just showing, just seeing, but not connected to something beyond sight or beyond, a direct experience of things. So this is just the basic idea. But now we're going to, it's a very simple idea, but it's a very deep idea. And one of the most beautiful things about studying Torah is sometimes you can see these basic, simple ideas play out in tiny, precise, beautiful details in the verses. And that makes all the difference in the world, because there's a big difference between knowing this idea, which you've all heard in some way, this idea of a spiral and of descent for the sake of ascent, and of, the worsening before the appearance of... But when you see it play out in particular ways, you sort of internalize it in a far deeper way. And that's what we're going to see now. And it's extremely beautiful. So let's go. So what happens now is that God is now presenting what is known in Jewish tradition as Arba Leshonot Geula, the 4 words for redemption. Those 4 words are 4 verbs that appear in 2 consecutive verses. We're in Exodus chapter 6, and the 2 verses are verse 6 and verse 7. The first verse has the first 3 words of redemption, or verbs, and then the second verse has the 4th one, right? Suggesting there's a big difference between the first 3 and the final 4, the final 4th one. And now let's just read it, and then see a little bit what's going on. And we're going to explain a little bit what's going on here, and then we're going to see the spiral sort of take place. But let's just start. Go say to the sons of Israel. Now, of course, you have many, many translations. This is my variation on an existing translation because I want to stress certain details, so I changed it in a particular way. Go say to the sons of Israel, I am Havaya, because that's the whole point, is to reveal the essential name. And I freed you. So this is, I'm using a past tense. It's more complicated in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it could be read as past or future. It's a bit complicated to explain, but it can be read as, so a more literal, simpler reading, and that's what you would find in most translations, would be the future, because it hasn't happened yet. But for reasons that I'll explain in a short while, I am going to turn it into the past tense. It can be read as both. A simpler reading would be the future tense. Yeah, of course. But for reasons that I'll explain in a minute, I'm using the past tense. And we can say that he's sort of speaking from the point of view of the future, of what is going to have happened in a while. So go to say to the sons of Israel, I am Avaya, and I freed you from your suffering under the Egyptians. That's the first word of redemption, to free. The Hebrew word is hotzeti. I shall bring you out. So here I use the word, again, translations here, and I preserve the word to free. Literally it means to bring you out. I shall bring you out, or I shall free you from the suffering under the Egyptians, and delivered you from their bondage. This is a hetzalti, saving or delivering. Vehotzeti vehitzalti, I delivered you from their bondage, and I redeemed you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements. And here the word is ga'alti. In Hebrew it's vehotzeti vehitzalti vega'alti. And there's even a poetic ring to them, because the middle one is almost like a combination of the first and the third one. Hotzeti veitzalti both have the letter tzadik, the tz sound, hotzeti etzalti, and then the second and the third one both have an L in them. Hitzalti ga'alti. So it's very beautiful. The middle word is almost like a transition between the first and the third one. So it's just beautiful Hebrew. It's like an evolution. Hotzeti etzalti ga'alti. So the middle verb has the tzadik from the first one and the lamed from the third one. Very beautiful. So this is the first verse, and it has a very long verse, and it has the first 3 words for redemption. This is basic, by the way, to Passover and the Haggadah. It corresponds to the 4 cups of wine that we drink in the Passover night, and connected to the 4 sons, all the 4s. There are a lot of foursomes going on in the Haggadah in Passover, so it starts with this. And then comes the second verse, and the 4th word, and it says, and I took you, lakachti. I took you to be my people, and I was your God, and you shall know that I am Avaya. Again, I am Avaya, your God, who frees you from the sufferings of the Egyptians. So just a quick sort of, this could be a whole class. We're going to do this very briefly just to get a feel for what's going on here. A very deep explanation starts with the sages interpreting the 4 verbs, and they say the following. They say the first one, the freeing, hotzeti, the bringing out, is just the the cessation of the harsh work. They're still in Egypt, but once the plague started, starting with the first plague, the plague of blood, they stopped working hard. Their enslavement really effectively came to an end because the Egyptians were too busy coping with the plagues. Second, the Hetzalti is the coming out physically from the land of Egypt following the 10th plague. The third one, Ga'alti, is the crossing of the Red Sea, a full week later, and the drowning of the Egyptians. So all these happen relatively close to one another, and they all they still very much have to do with the land of Egypt. In the first one, they're still in the land of Egypt. In the second one, they're just crossing the border out of the land of Egypt. And in the third one, they're getting rid of the Egyptians who are chasing them. But it's still bound up with Egypt. Even the third one, because the Egyptians are chasing them. However, the fourth one is very different. It's no coincidence, it's a verse in and of itself. The fourth one is the giving of the Torah, 6 weeks after the crossing of the parting of the Red Sea. It's reaching Sinai and the beginning of the receiving of the Torah. And the Hebrew word to take, also suggests marriage. To take a wife. If you know the laws of marriage in the Talmud, it's learned from the verb ki yikach ish isha, if a man takes a woman. So taking is one of the Hebrew words for marrying. So the idea is that the taking here is the sort of marriage, the metaphorical marriage between God and the Jewish people in Mount Sinai. Very different. There's a time jump between the first three and the final one, and also completely different context. The first three have to do with Egypt, and the final fourth one is far away from Egypt. It's 7 weeks after coming out of Egypt, 6 weeks after the parting of the Red Sea, and they're at the foothills of Mount Sinai. Another deeper, so this is Chazal, this is the sages. A Hasidic explanation says that the first level has to do with release from the Egyptians on a practical level. So for all of us, the first thing, we need to come out of our Egypt. Each one has their own Egypt, their own constraints in life, and there are 4 levels of coming out of it. The first level is just to get out of it, vehotzeti, just get out of there, and just stop the bad habit, or stop the bad thing you're doing, or the bad place you're at. Just get out of there. That's the first step. It's very superficial, but it's vital. So that's just getting out. And then the second one, which is coming out of the land of Egypt, is more emotional. It means coming out of the mental space of whatever it is that's limiting your life, that's narrowing you down. The first is just stop, it's like stop smoking. And then the second one maybe is don't hang around people who smoke so much. Get out of that atmosphere. Change your climate. Change your atmosphere. It's more emotional. It has to do with the mental space that surrounds you, or emotional space. The third one, that has to do with crossing the Red Sea and drowning the Egyptians, has to do with getting rid of remnants of whatever it is that's limiting you or enslaving you on a deeper, more even intellectual level in terms of your thoughts. You have the habit of going back in your mind to that old bad mental space you were in. And that means that you're out of Egypt, but psychologically the Egyptians are still running after you, and you're letting them. You're letting those negative thoughts haunt you. That means that although you're out of Egypt in the first 2 levels, Egypt is not out of you. The Egyptians are still running after you. And you need to drown that as well. You need to put that behind you as well. Right? 3 levels. But again, it all communicates with Egypt still. Then the 4th one, again, the first one, what is here called freeing or coming out, is just on a practical level. The second one, the delivering or the hetzalti, is the emotional one. And then the redeeming, the ga'alti, is, really freeing yourself from the internal bondage within you, being haunted by the enslaver, the whatever is the negative force that you're running away from. But it's all around the negativity. It all has to do with negating the negativity. 4th one, totally different. 4th one is you're getting a Torah. Getting the Torah, receiving the Torah means now you have a new vocation. You even it's deeper than that. You have a new master, a good one. Before you were enslaved to some pharaoh, some bad habit, the evil inclination, whatever it is. But now you do need to become a servant, but you need to have a proper master, a good master. You need God to be your master. And the Torah is, this is something positive. It's not negative. I have a vocation. I have a direction. I have the Torah guiding me, showing me the path, and it fills my life, and it gives me, my personal mission, my route in life, my path, things to do, things to think about, things to learn, good deeds to, invest in. I'm not just running away from. This is called in philosophy to be the distinction between the first 3 and the final 4 is that the first three have to do with freedom from. I'm free from some limitation. And the 4th one has to do with freedom to. I'm free to do what I want to do, what I really want to do. So the first freedom is negative and the second freedom is positive. And also, of course, the first 3 have to do with the holiday of Passover, and the final 4th one has to do with the holiday of Shavuot, Festival of Weeks, or Pentecost. So you can see that the jump here is extremely meaningful between the first 3 and the final 4th one. Now, so this is just a basic idea to think about deeply about what these 4 words mean. But now we're going to look at something more interesting, and this connects to the idea of the spiral. If you look very closely at the first part of the first verse, the one that has to do with the first word, the freeing, the hotzeti, the coming out, and you look at the final 4th stage, the one that has to do with receiving the Torah and positive freedom and all of this, you see that there are 3 elements that you get a sensation of a full circle being closed. There's a circular element here, and I'm going to show it to you now. 3 elements, and I've color-coded them, 3 elements that repeat themselves. So the first is the term I am Havaya. I am God's essential name. Repeats itself in the first word for redemption and in the 4th word for redemption. Full circle. Second, the verb to free, lehotzi, also appears. Vehotzeti in the first case, and hamotzi, who frees them, in the 4th one. And also the word suffering, which is in Hebrew is sivlot. It's a word that appears many times around the story of the enslavement in Egypt. It appeared in the previous Parsha, and Pharaoh mentioned it, and it repeats many times. The sivlot Mitzrayim, the suffering, or is sometimes translated as the labors of Egypt. So that appears again. In the first one it says, I freed you from your suffering under the Egyptians. And again, he says, it frees you, the one who frees you from your sufferings of the under the Egyptians or of the Egyptians. So this appears to be something like a circle. That this is called in Kabbalah that the end is wedged in the beginning and the beginning is wedged in the end. A famous concept from the Book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah. However, if you look closer, each one of these three links is slightly changed. There's a variation, just like the transition between Galgal and Gilgul, or Gola and Geula. There's a variation, and the variations make all the difference in the world. They turn the circle into a spiral. So let's look at the 3 points of difference. First point of difference. In the first instance, the first word for redemption, it says, I am Avaya. But the second one is a little more complicated. It says, you shall know I am Havaya, your God. Right? The difference is that it says, V'yadatem ki ani Havaya Elokechem. You shall know that I am Havaya, your God. That's the first difference. Second difference is that, as I said before, all the verbs can be read as future or past, but it can also be read as past. And in fact, I said before that the literal meaning or the simple meaning would be the future, but in fact, the way you read it, it makes more sense if it's future, but it looks like the past. And we're going to read it now as the past. So in the first instance, it says freed, hotzeti, in the past, but in the end it says freed in the present. And the final difference, and this is the subtlest one, and the one that is the most hard to explain in English, but we'll try, is that the first instance of the word sivlot, suffering, appeared in partial spelling, which means it can be read in the singular, suffering. And the second word is sivlot in a full spelling. You have the vav there, which means it has to be read in the plural. The first one can be read in the singular. I said plural before, what did I say? The first spelling can be read as a singular, one suffering, sivlat, and the second one can't be read in any other way as plural. It can only be read as plural, sufferings. So what's going on here? So the idea is really the following, in a way. The fact that God says, I am Avaya twice, and the first one he just says it, I am Avaya. Tell them that I am Avaya. And the second one, he's foreseeing that you shall know. The second one, of course, is when you receive the Torah. When you get to the final stage of the 4 stages. It's going to take some time. You're going to have to travel through the desert, and there's going to be some hardships and wars. You know, you will battle Amalek during the time, and there's thirst and hunger. A lot of things happen in those 6 weeks. But finally, you'll receive the Torah. Even the Torah takes time. You know, you just get the 10 Commandments in the beginning. Then you have to wait 40 days. So the whole thing takes time. But if you wait and you go through the steps, you'll reach a stage in which you know that I'm Havaya. You're not just told, you know it. So the first name Havaya is sort of somewhere high up there. And it's sort of, you know, it's declared. And it falls on you in some way. You don't know, you don't understand it. And in fact, just after this, that Moshe goes and tells all of this, all the 4 stages, he tells it to the Jewish people, it is said that they couldn't listen. Why? Because they were short of breath and hard of labor. That's what it says immediately after all of this little dialogue between God and Moshe. Is Moshe says, okay, I'm going to tell them what you told me. I'm going to tell them that you're going to free them and deliver them and save them and redeem them and on all of this. And he says everything. and they can't listen because they were short of breath and under hard labor. They couldn't listen because they're still in Egypt. They're still in Egypt. And for them, it's just a name. The name Havaya. It's just a concept. It's somewhere up high up there. Yeah, we heard you. And it's sort of a very deep concept that God can redeem you from anything. But you don't know it, you haven't experienced it, you don't really believe it. It's out of your reach. But what God promises, when you're going to go through the whole spiral, if you're going to survive the worsening, and you'll see that great miracles will happen, and then you'll know this name. So really there are three stages. There's the worsening, and then there's an initial revelation of the name Havaya, which doesn't really, seep in. And then finally, after the four stages, you get a full knowledge or experience of this level of godliness. Now let's look at the second two differences. Freed in the past versus freeing in the present, and the strange two forms of spelling of suffering. So we can say two things about this. Very, very, very beautiful. And this is really where the spiral gets really beautiful. The first three words have to do with a particular exile, the Egyptian exile. It's a one-time event in history. And at some point, it's going to be in your past, says God to the Israelites. And that's why he's speaking already in the past tense. And it'll be over. It'll be behind you. It'll be a memory. You'll talk about it in Passover. You'll remind yourself of it, every day. And you'll need to imagine as if you came out of Egypt, as all Jews are told to imagine, to think of themselves as coming out of Egypt. But it's going to be a one-time event, and it'll be behind you. It'll be a memory. And that's why it's in the past tense. And also, Sivlot can be read, the first Sivlot, as just one suffering, one-time event. So it's one period, very harsh, very bad, but it's over. It was a one-time thing, it's behind you. However, the spiral of suffering, or the spiral of constant regrowth, is never ending. And there's going to be more and more sufferings in the plural. Because it's not going to be as hard as Egypt, but there's always going to be, just before, a new dawn, there'll be a new darkness. And there's going to be a plurality of them. Sivlot, in the plural. And the coming out of it will not be in the past tense. It's an eternal present. Motzi. I free you. I freed you in the past. I free you now and again now and again now. And all the time I'm freeing you. I'm getting you out of a new level of suffering or constraint or labor. Labor also suggests birth. Coming out of Egypt is like being born. Egypt is like a womb. And of course, every time you're going to know me more. And not only know me, I didn't speak about this, it's not just you shall know I am Havaya, it's I shall become your God, means your actual guiding force in an experiential way. This means becoming your God. Havaya Elokecha, not just Havaya. Not just the name, the essential name Havaya. I'm going to be your God. A very, you're going very muchashi, what's the word? Very direct experience. A direct sensation of I'm guiding you in your life. Still trying to remember the word muchashi. Maybe probably write it down for me. Uh, tangible, thank you. It's going to be in a very tangible way. Another way of understanding the difference between sivlot in a partial spelling and sivlot in a full spelling, I said before that the letter Vav, this simple line, suggests a kind of ray of light that goes into our lives. And that adds the final element to this whole spiral thing. The partial spelling suggests a suffering that I don't understand. I'm in the dark as to why it's happening. Just like the sons of Israel can't hear Moshe because they're short of breath and they have to deal with very hard labor. Mikotze ruach ma'avoda kasha. There's no ray of light in their lives. So the beginning of the spiral is okay, if you say so, but I don't feel this in any way. I don't see any ray of light. I just see the suffering. However, the second suffering has this, on the one hand, it's like it's in the plural. There's more and more, endless. It said of righteous people, when they reach heaven, they don't rest. They go from force to force, from strength to strength. Sorry, that's the expression. Michail el Chayil. Each time they need to come out of a limitation and reach a higher fulfillment. So on the one hand, it's endless. On the other hand, there's a ray of light in it. Like a thread through so many beads. One thread, one ray of light that illuminates it from within. And what makes the difference? What makes the big difference that the second sivlot have this vav in them is if we go back to the verses here, then you remember that the fourth word of redemption is I took you. I took you is I marry you. I give you the Torah. Is the big difference between the first exile, which is the Egyptian exile, and all the other exiles you're going to go through as a collective, as a people, and as individuals, is that you're going to have the Torah with you. In Egypt, we didn't have the Torah because it was just the first 3 words of redemption. But when we get to the fourth one, we have the Torah. That is the fourth word of redemption. When you get the Torah, the suffering doesn't end, but it is illuminated. When you study Torah, you understand that this spiral is a deep, fundamental, essential part of our lives. That before there's a new revelation of God's essence, before you know on a deeper level that I am Havaya, that He is really what is and was and will be and creates everything, there needs to be a darkness, a worsening, a hiding of the face, a suffering, but it'll be illuminated by the Torah. You'll have Torah to study that'll guide your way, that'll illuminate your way. So this is a lesson, a deep lesson to be learned from the opening of this Parsha. That the whole book of Exodus talks about this archetypal exile and redemption. And just this borderline situation of the end of the first Parsha and the beginning of the second one is a point in time in which it seems like not only are we not coming out of Egypt, but it's becoming worse. However, all this is a descent for the sake of ascent. It's leading up to a higher revelation of God's essence, which itself is divided into the first stage of the revelation, in which it's just outside of me and I don't know it. I'm just told that there is this level, but I'm too short of breath. I'm dealing with this hard work, with this heart situation in my life. It's just like some super conscious faith, or a glimmer in the horizon. That's what it is. But it doesn't. But I'm still in the dark as to what's going on. But then, as things progress and advance, and I come out of it and I grow out of it, I assume my breath again, and I receive the Torah, and I can, breathe in and out and study it properly. And just like we did in this class, we took 4 verses, and, we took our time to look closely at all the little things that are going on there. And then suddenly this whole concept, very simple concept of the spiral, is sort of, spelled out in a far more detailed and a nuanced way that really tells us, it runs home this idea in a deeper way. That when we go through these stages and we're fully out of Egypt and we're married to receive the Torah, and we need to receive the Torah anew every year and every month. There's a new month starting this week, and every day maybe, then we can go through this process of renewal and bring light into our lives, and it doesn't get rid of the suffering that's an essential part of existence, but it illuminates it from within, and it turns it into an element in the process, in the evolution of growth. So this was our class for Va'era for this week. Hi, if you enjoyed this video, please press like and subscribe to the channel. Also, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Patreon is a platform for supporting independent creators. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much.